Are you desiring to know how to discipline your child in a safe and healthy way that's going to be beneficial for both them and you? We have professional psychologist Joel Pukalo here, and he's going to be going through some strategies and tips in effectively disciplining your child in a way that stays connected to them and in a way that's effective and loving.
In today's session, we're going to unpack some very practical tools and strategies of how discipline can be a positive, connection-building opportunity for both you and your child. It's really an opportunity to grow, learn, and connect with each other, and also to teach as well. So this can really be an opportunity, discipline, if we can first wait until our child is ready, and us as adults are ready too to have a conversation, and also if we're consistent. So firm, fair, flexible, and follow through, I always say, are the 4 F's that are keys for parents, and not being rigid. So by being firm and following through consistently on our expectations, before our children even act out, they have a clear sense of what those boundaries and what those parameters are. And just setting those up in advance is a really important aspect of being able to have effective discipline. Before we continue and really unpack discipline in more detail, I want to look at this idea of connecting brain to brain. So there's 3 colors, green, yellow, and red zones that we can be in as parents, as well as our children can be in as well. Green is when we're calm and regulated. The child will appear calm, open, receptive, engaged. We can reason with them at that point. This is the teaching zone. We can teach our child because their brain's receptive to ideas, what we're trying to talk about. So that's when our children are calm and regulated in the green zone. That's when we want to be able to do our disciplining and teaching. And same with parents. We want to be in that zone so we're able to teach. The next zone is the yellow zone, which would be in the limbic part of our brain. And that's the pause zone. It's like we're starting to get dysregulated. In this zone, children could appear emotionally needy, clingy, cuddly, demanding, distracted, hyper, uncooperative, nervous, laugh, crying. For our daughter, she's just kind of dysregulated, and you can tell she's just having a hard time. Not the best time to do any teaching. In the yellow zone, if we do want to do some teaching, it's very succinct, very short, very few words, and we're actually modeling and coaching for our children what they should be doing. Because when children are in the yellow zone, we can't expect their brains to be online and functioning as if they were in the green zone. So if we do want to have any conversation, we're primarily the ones driving the car, so to speak, modeling and coaching what our child should say. At that time, we want to be able to set some limits, like, Jayla, if you'd like juice, ask nicely, or will there be no juice, right? And helping our children to regulate their bodies and using their words and actions, pausing, breathing. We've got a nice regulation kind of cozy corner for our daughters on the main floor. We bought them a little soft little mat blanket that they really like, and they have a calming chair and some different calming tools. So when you see your children going into that yellow zone, going to their chill space, which we'll talk about later in today's session, can be really helpful as well. And also being able to really help them be aware of their emotions, especially if they're young. We're doing that as parents. Joel, you feel sad right now. Do you feel sad? Are you upset? Are you worried? Are you stressed? Are you angry? So not asking all those questions at the same time, of course, but one question and allow them to respond. Because as children get older, we want to teach them to feel it, to heal it, and name it, to tame it. So just being able to be aware and express our emotions is so powerful. And the final zone is the red zone, which is the no talk zone or a brains offline. Children are either in fight, flight, or freeze, and really probably having some more intense externalizing or internalizing behaviors. This is the time for a chill zone. We don't want to talk. We simply want to get to their eye level, make eye contact. For some kids, they might want gentle touch, and just being there with them, or they might need to go to their chill space. Of course, the chill space should be close enough so we're not creating a disconnection with them. We're able to go over there with them. We're not playing, we're not having fun, but we are just being with them in that moment. And that's where discipline done well is recognizing when children are in the red zone, they're not ready to have a conversation. You know, I can think of growing up, and I had amazing parents. They're awesome people, and we all kind of make mistakes sometimes as parents, right? So we're all on a journey. And my parents would say, when I was maybe in the more yellow or red zone, hey, Joel, like, you've lost computer for a day, and if you keep talking, you lose it for 2 days, and so on and so forth. Well, trying to discipline a child when they're in the red zone, or even yellow, the consequences, if you make them steeper, their brain's offline, so it's really not helping them. So making sure they're able to have those regulation breaks, or we're pressing pause before we try to provide discipline. It's a really important key. So we really, in an ideal world, only want to give discipline in the green zone. That can certainly be a challenge. But as we look at this next slide here, when our brain is offline and when we're kind of in that brainstem of the red zone or limbic system of the yellow zone, our brain really is offline. So speaking, talking, it's really just engaging the child's downstairs brain, so to speak, as Siegel and Bryson call it, of the amygdala. And we're really not able to help them learn anything at that point. When we look at the flip side, the neocortex or the green zone, a child's brain is online, that they're actually responsive to our questions, their upstairs brain, they're able to reason with us. So that's really important to remember. Is my child's brain offline? Because discipline in an offline brain it's kind of like talking to the wall. There's no point in doing it because it's probably going to make the situation worse, I should say. But when our brain's online, that's when discipline works. So if we look at this visual chart here, this is a powerful resource that I use for many families, recognizing these 4 colors of the zones of regulation. Blue being sad, yellow being worried, stressed, anxious, you can see there. Red, more angry, upset, dysregulated. And of course, green is calm, relaxed, and regulated. We want to be able to do as much discipline as possible in the green zone. It's not always possible, but as close to green as possible. Sometimes blue and yellow can work too. Where discipline does not work is in the red zone. So that's one thing we want to be mindful. That is for sure pressing pause, taking chill breaks. If we can do it when we're in the yellow zone, that's most helpful before our children get to red. But understanding our zones as parents is equally important. We want to be able to provide discipline when we're not in the red zone either. And this is a tool, for children, I'd say ages 5 to 6 and up, that I really love for parents to talk about, every day at home. So you could print something like this off and talk about it at dinner time because there's emotional awareness, expression, and equilibrium of mixing different types of feelings. So if we could help our children become more aware, even by labeling and coaching, hey, for example, to my daughter, Jayla, right now you seem a little bit worried or you seem a bit sad. Labeling and coaching those emotions helps build that awareness so children are more self-aware. As they're more self-aware, they're able to self-regulate or regulate themselves and know, oh, I'm feeling a little bit stressed out or worried, or my body's dysregulated. I need to go to my chill space and calm down. Here you can see those 4 colors. In terms of small, medium, and big problems, when we're in the blue, or especially the green, it's a small problem. We can solve things ourselves. We don't need a lot of help. But as we get to the yellow zone, anything becomes a medium problem. You can see that slow sign. We need to ask for help. And that's a really key piece as well. Teaching our children when they get into the yellow zone, we need to ask for help. Because if we can do that, then we're not getting to the place where we're at the red zone where we have a big, huge problem. And that's where most often the discipline has to come out. I think as parents, disciplining in the yellow zone or being able to course correct in the yellow zone can mitigate a lot of discipline we have to give in the red zone. So building our own awareness of when we're feeling dysregulated in the yellow zone and saying, hey, Jayla, what you're doing right now is kind of stressful. Of course, appropriate self-disclosures. We don't want to make our children feel that we're putting our emotions on them, but we can communicate if a child's, being a little bit unruly or out of control or making poor choices. We can say that's stressful, what you're saying there. So communicating our zones and also really being aware of the child's zone. When they're starting to get dysregulated, we've got to intervene. Because if we don't, they'll get into the red zone and it'll be much harder to provide discipline. How, you might ask, is discipline actually an opportunity to grow, teach, and connect? It feels more like stress and chaos to me. Well, thankfully, Siegel and Bryson, in their book, No Drama Discipline, offer some just practical ideas and suggestions in terms of supporting that discipline process. The first is this idea of mindsight. So what we want to be able to do in discipline is develop insight in our children to help our kids understand their own feelings and their own responses to difficult situations. Really, that's the goal of discipline, to create insight to help our children know how they're doing, why they did what they did, and also how they can do things differently. Empathy really ties in nicely with that as well. If we can give kids practice in reflecting on how their actions impact others through the discipline process, they're learning, growing, and able to probably make better choices next time as well. Repair is also key. So asking our kids what they can do to make things right or how we can make it better. These are really 3 amazing opportunities and invitations that discipline done right in a connection-based fashion actually provides. So if we kind of look at the next slide here, we can see some really important questions. as we look at that goal of discipline, it's saying yes to the child, but no to the behavior. So really focusing on staying connected and also redirecting as well. How can we, instead of react, be prepared and support our children by asking meaningful questions for ourselves as well? So a common idea too is, hey, I love you, I care about you, but I don't really like the actions that you're doing right now. So here are 3 really important reflective questions that can help us. So why did my child act this way? Maybe what were the triggers, what were the precursors, even what emotions were they feeling in that moment? Number 2 is, what lessons do I want to teach my child in this moment? I could get upset, I could punish them, I could give them consequences. Of course, some of those things can be helpful, and we have to be firm and follow through in terms of our expectations for our children. But instead of just offering random consequences, a common thing, parents will come into my clinic and they'll say, yeah, my child lost TV privileges for a week. Well, it's great. It's good to have a consequence, but what's that teaching them? I do believe in consequences, and I think consequences can be kept to that day. So if your child does something that day, they could lose privileges to TV, computer, tech for that day, because you're teaching them, hey, you know what? If you make poor choices, you're going to lose opportunities for that day. But I believe, as much as possible, tomorrow is a new day. Tomorrow is a fresh start. So taking everything one day at a time. Of course, there's big incidences where perhaps if they're looking at really inappropriate things on the computer, well, their circle is too big. We can't give them that much responsibility. We've got to shrink their circle, and maybe they don't need to have access to those opportunities. But really kind of, as a parent, thinking, what am I trying to teach my child in this moment? And really, how am I either trying to grow my child's circle of responsibility or help them to understand that maybe their actions or what they're communicating is their circle is too big? And question number 3 is, how can I best teach this lesson? And of course, a couple of things to really highlight is, we can't teach that lesson when our child's in the red zone really upset. The most important aspect of teaching the lesson is both when you and your child are calm, regulated, and in the green zone. So as we think about these 3 powerful questions, let's look at staying on track as a parent. Because as a parent, we can answer those questions in different ways. Why did my child act this way? What lesson do I want to teach them? The parent-driven approach says, my child acted this way because I don't have enough structure. I'm not being clear enough. I'm not being firm enough. I need to teach them that I'm in control, and that if they act, they get punishments. That's the parent-driven approach. The child-driven approach is, I guess I'm being too strict, or I'm having too many rules or too many regulations, and maybe as a parent, I'm doing too much, so I've got to dial it down, give my child more choice so they have less of their behaviors. And the child-driven approach, a parent might say, what lesson do I want to teach my child in this moment? I want to teach my child how to be calm. And their answer or solution to that is kind of possibly giving in to what they want. We can see those are 2 ditches of ideally what we do not want to do. Staying on track and staying in the center of the road in connection-based parenting. We answer the questions this way. Why did my child act this way? As a parent and child, we want to work as a team to seek to understand and ask powerful questions. So really engaging with your child when they are calm and regulated of why they did act that way, and trying to get a sense of maybe there's some unmet needs, whether it's food, they're hungry, they're thirsty, they didn't get enough sleep, they're dysregulated, or maybe there was a trigger in their environment. The other piece too is, maybe it's possible that they're seeking your attention. Maybe you're busy with their other siblings, they're not feeling as connected, so they could be attention seeking, they could be trying to get some sort of reward. What is the function of their behavior? So really exploring that in a bit more detail. And the lesson we want to teach our children is how to build that insider awareness. Okay, first, what zone am I in? What emotions did I feel, and how did it lead me to act the way I did? And I think the big lesson too is that empathy piece. How are your actions, how are your words and actions impacting the way that your parents and possibly your siblings are feeling around you? So building that empathy or mindset is probably one of the most important teaching tools. I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that has helped children more than anything. If they can understand how their actions and feelings are negatively impacting other people around them, the majority, maybe 50 to 75% of children, if they can be more aware of that in the moment, they'll do things differently. Of course, there's children with oppositional defiant disorder and other diagnoses where that's going to be more challenging. but let's say the majority, 50 to 75%, if we can just build that mindset and teach them those lessons by asking powerful questions and having them reflect on things, that is really, really helpful and a great way to do that. And, in terms of teaching the lesson, being able to ask them, what size of problem was that? Small, medium, or big? If they can identify what size the problem was, I say a small problem is something you can solve on your own or solve by yourself. A medium problem, you have to ask for help, and a big problem is like an emergency. So often children have a big reaction to a small problem. So if they can even recognize that afterwards and then practice and talk about, let's say, the juice spilled on the floor. So I had a meltdown, I was super sad. Well, actually, juice spilling is a small problem. I can solve it myself by going to get a cloth, cleaning it up, and asking for more juice. So if they could practice that for next time, you're teaching them the tools and skills of the future. Maybe for some kids, the juice spilling would be a medium problem. They feel so beside themselves. They have no solution. Like, for example, my daughter, she's only 3 years old. She does need to ask for help. And she said, the juice spilled. Dad, can you get a cloth? And it's kind of cool. Our daughter actually loves cleaning up. So she'd get the cloth part, but she would need help getting more juice. And sometimes she'd say, more juice, my juice spilled. And I would tell her, hey, Jayla, can you please ask nicely for more juice? I'd love to give you some juice. Just ask nicely. So kind of the replacement behaviors and teaching how to ask the proper way in those moments. Because sometimes our children just need a bit of course correction. They actually don't need punishment. They don't need consequences. They don't need a severe thing. They just need a course correction of finding replacement behaviors to teach them the right way. The best approach is the proactive one. So proactive parenting is based on connecting and redirecting, as we can see here, promoting regulation, moving towards green. And the best parenting discipline happens in the yellow zone, proactive before we're getting to red. Reactive discipline is reacting to the child, engaging their downstairs brain, and that's what happens in the red zone. So really, we can make a child more red when we do reactive parenting, but reactive parenting really doesn't do discipline until a child gets in the red zone. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes we all make as parents. Sometimes even myself, we get busy, we're tied up, things are happening. So we don't intervene early enough, which is why we have to discipline a kid when they're really upset and why the discipline process is just so frustrating for all of us. So Siegel and Bryson, in their most recent book on No Drama Discipline, they actually provide some very practical mistakes that even great parents make, they say. So I'm going to go through all 20 of them here briefly, just so we can touch on them and just be aware of them, because awareness is always the first step, and even awareness of what we don't want to be doing helps us move towards what we do want to be doing. So here's some things that they suggest. Discipline becomes consequence-based instead of teaching-based. We want to avoid that. If we're not having something we're teaching, then our discipline is off. We're just giving consequences. It's not discipline, it's just consequences. The other piece here is that thinking that we can't be warm and nurturing. Connection-based discipline or effective discipline happens when we can say yes to the child and show that we care. We're not saying yes to more tech time. We're not saying yes to whatever they're having a tantrum. We have to be firm, and we have to be following through. If we ask a child to get off the technology or tech time, or put something away, or they can't have a snack and they're having a meltdown, at that point we cannot give in. We can't be warm and nurturing and say, okay, Johnny, you can have 5 more minutes. No way. If you say it's over, it's over. But we can't say, hey, I'm sorry, it must be frustrating, it's over. We can do something else. And of course, providing warnings and times. Even for our 3-year-old, if we say, Jayla, 5 more minutes on the computer, then we're shutting it down. And it really helps our daughter when she has the autonomy to shut it down. I'm learning this even from my wife, because we learn things from each other, right? Sometimes I'd want to close the computer, and that would make her very upset. I create a red zone situation for no need at all, where if I say, Jayla, time to shut the technology, close the computer lid, please. It might take her 20 seconds, but she much prefers to close it herself. So that is really important, as much as possible, putting your child in the driver's seat. We get to be firm on our expectations and our boundaries, and we also have to follow through, but being flexible and fair is important. So if it takes 20 seconds longer for my daughter to come to terms with closing the screen versus me shutting it and her getting into a meltdown, flexibility is much preferred and wise. So being flexible is saying yes to the child, but no to the behavior, and still having those clear consequences. Confusing consistency with rigidity, exactly like we talked about. That's the flexibility piece there. Talking too much. short, concise. If a child's in the red zone, it's a no talk zone. We have to wait till they're regulated. If it's the yellow zone, very short modeling and coaching. We can really only have a full-blown conversation or really dialoguing in the green zone. So make sure we remember that. Focusing too much on the behavior and not enough on the reason why. Exactly. So being able to focus on the size of problem or why a child acted that way and really unpacking that piece. Focusing on how we say what we say, that's so important. Making sure that we're in the green zone or we're delivering and communicating from a more calm and regulated state. We can see number 7 here is communicating that our children shouldn't experience big or negative feelings. That's really important. You're allowed to feel even angry or upset. We can't always be in the green zone. Some people take zones of regulation and say, what can we do to get back to green? That's not always the solution. We have a feelings rainbow. We feel all the feelings every day, but what we have to do is express our red, angry feelings in an appropriate way that doesn't hurt other people around us. So using our words and actions to express red in a way that's appropriate. Like, I'm mad, I'm frustrated, I want it to go on longer. Thank you for expressing that. It is really frustrating, isn't it? I guess next time we'll have to put a timer on, but how you feel is important and it's valid. So acknowledging feelings while still keeping consistent with what you feel is important or the parameters or guidelines. Overreacting. So we overreact, so our kids focus on our overreactions, not their own actions. I mean, that speaks for itself. We need to stay as much as possible closest to the green zone. We have to be realistic. Sometimes we can be in yellow, but if you're in the red zone, you need to regulate before we discipline or have a conversation with a child. Number 9 is really important. We don't repair. And I think that's a really important piece. As parents, we all make mistakes. One of my close friends, she does some parenting stuff for people across Canada, and she did a really great talk recently on parent guilt. And we all feel guilty sometimes as parents because we all make mistakes. And that's part of what parenting is all about. You know, it's learning and growing. Hopefully we don't make too big of mistakes and we, as much as possible, stay out of the red zone when we're talking to our kids. But at some point, we're all pushed to our limits and we make small mistakes. The key is, though, to repair. To actually afterwards say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. I didn't really need to get upset for that. I'm sorry that upset you. Or how did that make you feel? And really processing and asking for forgiveness for our children is so important. And making sure we're doing everything we can to repair or restore that connection. And that's where we can see 9 and 10 are very related. Emotional, reactive moments, realizing we're overreacted. Yeah, definitely, if we do that, we want to go back and repair. Number 11 is really key. We forget that our children may sometimes need help in making good choices and calming themselves down. That goes back to the zones. Recognizing when a child's in the yellow zone, they need our modeling and coaching. We can't expect them to calm down and use their strategies effectively then. And when they're in the red zone, there's no hope for that. So recognizing our zone and the child's zone is the first step to making sure our parenting is on point and informed based on all the child's regulation level. Consider an audience when disciplining or getting trapped in power struggles. Those can be quite related. I find the hardest times for me to discipline is when I'm at, let's say, my parents or my in-laws or other places where there's other people around. And that's where I can kind of get a bit more trapped, possibly in power struggles as well. So for those 2 points there, what I typically do and what we typically do is when our child's having a meltdown in another environment, just calmly, gently take them aside, carry them if you have to another room, and then talk about it there. It just minimizes the potential for those power struggles or the audiences and just helps us to be at our best with parents. We can see number 14 says, we discipline in response to our habits and feelings instead of what the child needs in that moment, and we embarrass our kids by correcting them in front of others. So those 2 points of just recognizing and being mindful. Really, if we're parenting and disciplining from the green zone or green-yellow zone as much as possible, as regulated as possible, we're really able to mitigate the chances of most of these experiences and kind of pitfalls, 20 pitfalls of parenting. Number 16 and 17 are a bit different. We assume the worst before letting our kids explain, and we dismiss our kids' experiences. So that's really important, where we have to give them space to say, hey, you know what color were you feeling? Let's unpack that and let's talk a little bit about that. it's really interesting because often kids will be almost more strict than we will as parents. So once we unpack and talk through their feelings, we can say, what do you think would be a way to make this right? Or what would be an appropriate consequence? And at the end of the day, as parents, we own the house, we make the rules. It's our rules and we have to follow through. But inviting kids to consider their consequence, some children might be silly and say, oh, eating chocolate for a week or something silly, or more video games. But chances are at least half the kids out there will be like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I deserve to lose this or that. And it's interesting. Sometimes the child's consequences are stricter than even ours. So keep that in mind as we kind of journey there. And we can see the other pieces are being too hard on ourselves, or expecting too much, or letting kind of experts trump our own instincts. So recognizing every child's different. So we can't parent like our friend or like someone else. And even you could be a great parent and just doing an awesome job parenting, but your child might not be as responsive to your friend's child or what have you. So every kid's different, so we shouldn't measure or judge ourselves based on how our child's responding, because since every child is so different, parenting looks different for each child, and we need different strategies that are effective, and even the great parenting strategies that work for most kids might not work for some kids who are more complex, and recognizing that. And I always try to encourage parents, if your child's having some difficulties, it might not be you as a parent. If you're doing all the right things, sometimes some children aren't as responsive and require more supports, talking to your family physician, counselor, psychologist, etc. as well, reaching out. So as we think about discipline and how to stay connected in discipline, I want to talk about 3 principles that Siegel and Bryson bring up in their book, No Drama Discipline. The first one they call turning down the shark music, which I would say translates to not making assumptions or accusations. So sometimes in the background we kind of have our own past experiences and fears and things like that. And a quote from Siegel and Bryson, they say, one of the worst byproducts of shark music, or these thoughts that come into our mind, is the parental tendency to make assumptions about what we perceive to be obvious. So kind of, let's say if your child does something that's really triggering or upsetting to you, that would be an example of shark music and really getting triggered. So making sure that recognizing when we're getting into the yellow zone or towards the red zone because of some of those things, and just that recognition of not making assumptions or accusations. And step 2 is chasing the why, asking powerful questions. So staying out of the pitfall of step 1 and getting to this principle 2. Why is my child acting this way? What are they communicating? Because behavior is communication too. So instead of blaming or criticizing, why'd you do that? What'd you do this time? Stop it. Cut it out. You got to get better. Get with it. Whatever. Really stop and ask why. And think about the how as well in principle 3. Because as a parent, that regulated communication for what you're going to say as you ask those questions is important. So you might ask something like, what zone are you in right now? Or what kind of caused you to do that? Or why did you do that? I'm just curious. Getting curious and asking powerful questions is really important. So sometimes it's even less about what you say and more about how you say it. Because if you talk about, why'd you do that? More in the red zone. I always say talking with all caps and exclamation points. That's like talking in the red zone. It shuts down conversations. And we can do that as parents. But what we want to do is ask powerful questions by talking in lowercase letters and question marks. Hey, just wondering, what zone are you in right now? What kind of made you feel that way? What kind of put you over the edge and to act that way or to do that, right? So really being able to have regulated parent communication is important, and being really mindful of, as much as possible, like I said, we can't always be in the green zone, but as a parent, we set the regulation. We're the thermostat that sets the temperature for our child's regulation. So even if we're having a hard time, as much as possible, we need to regulate ourselves and be in the green zone for our child as much as possible. If we're struggling and having a hard time, process that, talk about your other feelings afterwards, but in the moment, here with your child, we're here to support them through their difficulties. So a common thing we talk about, and I see a lot in my clinic, is how do we support a child through a tantrum? They're having like a level 10 meltdown, or they're really upset, and they're really in the red zone. So I want to look at 8 practical steps that you can do that can be very helpful. Step 1, regulate yourself. Don't overlook that step. Before you can get close and support your child, you need to be regulated yourself. If you need to take a couple minutes in the bathroom or switch off with your other parent, or like your co-parent, the child's other parent, do that. And when you're as regulated as possible, then you can get close. And hopefully your child's regulated too, making eye contact and listening. For some children, if they're not regulated or don't like physical touch, they might not want you to be as close or give them a hug. They might find that too constraining. So maybe they're in their chill space and you're just talking to them close by. And the be curious and seek to understand, that really is going to be most effective when they're in the green zone. So they might have to be calm and regulated before we can get to step 5. Showing empathy, this is validating their emotions and saying, hey, you know what, that must be so hard that you feel this color or that color. And that's why having that feelings wheel right there and labeling and coaching those feelings really is a big part of building that empathy. We can see listening again. Never overestimate listening. It's important at all ages, but especially teens. Not assuming, but really listening and offering that warm affection. And as we can see here, Siegel and Bryson also illustrate some really important connection principles of how to stay connected as well. They talk about communicating comfort. So just like we saw in that last slide, offering that warm affection. So really being able to communicate both in verbal and nonverbal ways that you care, you're there to support them. Then validate, validate, validate. This is emphasizing the last slide we saw with the 8 steps. So when, for example, a child's sad, you shouldn't respond to them and saying, oh, it's not a big deal, we'll do it next time or whatever. Really understand, hey, I understand you're sad, you really wanted to go. How can I support you? How can we journey in that right now? And just creating that space and making sure we're not minimizing feelings. And I think as parents, because we don't want behavior, sometimes we can minimize emotion and just hopefully make that go away. So we have to do less discipline. But if we can see discipline as a positive opportunity to connect and converse, then we'll welcome and create space for that a little bit more. And as parents, we always have to remember this one: stop talking and listening. Asking powerful questions and listen to what our child is explaining or what they're journeying in. And that's where tools like those zones of regulation, other visuals I showed you are great supports that can start those great conversations and allow you to ask powerful questions, because your child might not know how they feel. So giving them a grid or a roadmap for some potential feelings can really help. And it can also help you in reflecting what you hear. So really able to reflect what you hear and validate what they've said, focusing on what your kids have actually told you. So, hey, yeah, you're in the blue zone. That must be really hard. What would you say is the saddest part about that? Or what makes you most sad? And we practice this in counseling sessions with parents and children, just going back and forth and having these conversations where we're building empathy and building connection for each other. And that's really important. So that's what makes discipline work, kind of going back to our original thought here. Principles for discipline, it's going to be positive and it's going to be connection-based when you wait till your child is ready, as calm and regulated, closest to the green zone as possible, as you're consistent, not rigid, remembering, being firm, following through on what you said, keeping those consistent expectations, but also sprinkling in that fairness and flexibility to help your child regulate and adapt, especially if they're in a more dysregulated state. Really, I think this is the goal, and this is what I've done a lot in sessions with families, is developing that mindset of asking the child to consider their own feelings while also imagining how someone else feels or how your parent or other family members felt. And that's where this visual here of the 4 colors of building that mindset. How did you feel is question number 1. And then what zones do you think your words or actions put mom and dad into? What colors do you think they're feeling right now? And asking those explicit questions with this particular visual has helped a lot of families really expand their child's awareness. And in doing so, it really helps mold and model and change those behaviors a bit and makes discipline a real opportunity to learn and grow. As we wrap things up, I want to leave you with a couple final thoughts. And this final thought is the idea of redirecting. So sometimes when our children are having a hard time, like I said, they just need a course correction. They might not need a full-out consequence. So reducing our words, resisting the urge to talk. When we're providing discipline, making sure we're reducing our words, embracing our emotion like we talked about, describing, don't preach. So again, keep it short and just help the child understand what leads up to their bad decision. And as I mentioned, involving the child in the discipline. So this is just a great acronym that can help you remember kind of the points we've already talked about today and really the keys to connection-based parenting. Next, I talk about reframing. So instead of saying no, having that conditional yes. So instead of saying, no, you can't have a phone, or no, you can't have tech time right now, and say, hey, this is an important goal. Let's work towards that. Let's break down the steps that we can turn what would be a no into a planned yes. Planning one step at a time towards that yes and building that. The other piece too is creatively approach the situation. So being a bit silly sometimes. The example here that Siegel and Bryson gave is Jimero in the car seat. But what we often use for our younger kids is they have monkeys and kitties and stuffed animals, and say, oh, Monkey really wants to go for a ride. Do you want to go for a ride with Monkey? Or, oh, we've got to put Kitty to bed. Let's go to bed with Kitty. So kind of making things a little bit fun and creative for kids is a really great way to move through stuck moments and help them progress. And as we talked about, teaching that mindset piece here. So you can see the summary in the next slide. Use this acronym, REDIRECT, developed by Siegel and Bryson here, just to remind yourself some of the great things that parents do. Reducing those words, embracing emotion, and really focusing in on that, teaching those mindset tools as well in these steps. So remember that in your journey. And as we kind of wrap up, remember as well that building that emotional awareness every day is so important. So as you can see in this, another option for a feelings wheel here is get something like this, put it on your fridge, put it somewhere in your house where at dinner time you guys can talk about, let's say, 1 or 2 emotions you felt each day. And building that emotional awareness every day when we're in the green zone, our brain learns best in the green zone. So if we can build that emotional awareness, our children will be much better or much more attuned to being aware of their own emotions and being able to express them, which I really believe is the prerequisites for effective discipline. If we don't have our children understanding how they're feeling and having that mindset development of empathy of how others are feeling, discipline will just be behaviors. It will just be consequences. But if we can build emotional awareness, emotional expression, and empathy towards others, our discipline can be far more effective and far more connecting as our children really understand not only their feelings, but how their actions and how their words can affect the people around them. That's teaching, learning, growing, and discipline. And developing that emotional foundation really is the key to the effectiveness of this. I was really encouraged by Siegel and Bryson's parental encouragements. They said 4 things. So I'll wrap up this session on discipline with these 4 areas as we think about connection-based discipline. There's no magic wand. There's no magic formula. Since every kid is different, you're going to have to journey with your child and figure out what works best using those 4 principles: firm, fair, flexible, follow through. That is the guiding compass. There's northeast, southwest. That's your guiding compass. If you can stay with those 4 principles, there's no magic wand, there's no formula, but those principles will help you get where you want to go. Number 2 is your kids benefit even when you mess up. See, if you're just providing consequences, your kids are not going to benefit. But if you can develop these connection-based discipline principles, and after a situation happens, connect, talk about emotions, build that awareness, and even for you to kind of apologize or own your 2% when you make mistakes, your children are learning so much from you processing in a developmentally appropriate manner your emotions and your experiences. It probably wouldn't be developmentally appropriate to cry for a half hour and say how regretful and how sad you are for the mistakes you made as a parent. If you feel that way, it's great to have close friends or counselors that can support you emotionally. We don't want to put too much emotional burden on our children, but in a short, concise way, say, hey, you know what? I'm really sorry. I messed that up. Or I shouldn't have got so upset. I'm sorry about that. Our kids are going to learn so much because when our children make mistakes, we expect them to learn, change, and grow. So shouldn't we have the same standards for ourselves? When we make mistakes, we should hold ourselves to our same standards because our children learn best not from what we say, but what we do. So if we can model, even in our mistakes, how to learn and grow, that is so powerful. And that ties with step number 3. You can always reconnect. So there's withdrawals and deposits. I was talking with some near and dear parents to my heart recently. They're saying, oh, we just feel so bad. We made this mistake or that mistake, minor mistakes. And I said, you know what? You guys are amazing parents. In a day, yes, you make some withdrawals. Maybe you get upset or miss 1 or 2 things, but think of how many deposits. Think of how many positive things that you're putting into your child's life. You're making way more deposits than the average parent. And that's what I want to focus on as well for each of you listening today. Even write down that list of deposits, because we all have parent guilt. We all feel bad. We focus on the withdrawals, the 2 or 3 things we did wrong today. Focus on the deposits. Focus on the 2 or 10 or however many things you did great today as a parent, because it's going to help you be better at this discipline process. When you realize discipline isn't about consequences, it's not about making withdrawals. Even in discipline, we can be making deposits and connecting more. So I strongly recommend checking that out and thinking about that. And the final piece, number 4, is it's never too late to make a positive change. No matter where you're at on your parenting journey, we're all learning and growing. So no condemnation, no guilt for mistakes you've made in the past. Today is a new day. And even for myself and my wife, we're professionals. We do this for a job, but we make mistakes. And we're always learning and growing new things too. And I think there's 2 types of people. Those who keep growing and those who stop growing. So if we can just maintain that growth mindset, which we want our children to have too, that's one of the most powerful things. So thanks so much for joining us today. Feel free to check out our other topics on parenting as well. And I wish you all the best in your parenting journey. You can do this.